Welcome to another Traveller's Guide IELTS video. In this video we are looking at Writing Test 1 from IELTS Academic Book 18. We're going to look at the questions for both tasks and I'm going to give you some example answers that you could use. If you like this video, please press the thumbs up, leave a comment with your opinions and subscribe to Traveller's Guide IELTS for more videos like this one. Now, the IELTS academic writing test includes 2 tasks and you get 1 hour in total to complete both tasks. Task 1 is describing a graph or a table or a process, maybe a flowchart or a map. You'll have some kind of diagram to write about. It is worth 1/3 of your overall mark. You should spend around 20 minutes on this task and write at least 150 words. Task 2 is writing about a given topic. You should give your opinions, reasons and examples. This one is worth 2/3 of your final mark. You should spend about 40 minutes on this one and write at least 250 words. Notice that it's 1 hour in total, so you can decide how much time to spend on each one. And you can do task 2 before you do task 1 if you want, as that one is more important in terms of marks. Please note that task 1 in the general training module is a letter writing task. So today we are only looking at the academic questions. The IELTS academic writing test has 4 marking criteria. They are task response for task 1 and task achievement for task 2, which basically means, did you answer the question? Does your essay look like an essay? Then cohesion and coherence. Do your ideas flow? Have you used linking words? That kind of thing. Then we have grammatical range and accuracy, or grammar. And finally, lexical resource, also known as vocabulary. So using a range of words, using them correctly and spelling them correctly. Now we're going to look at Book 18, Task 1. Here are my examples. So, writing Task 1 in Book 18 says you should spend about 20 minutes on this task. And at the bottom, write at least 150 words. This is always the same for every Task 1 question. In the box, we have the graph below gives information about the percentage of the population in 4 Asian countries living in cities from 1970 to 2020, with predictions for 2030 and 2040. Summarise the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Again, that final sentence is the same in every task 1. So, there's quite a lot of information in this opening sentence. The graph below gives information about the percentage of the population in 4 Asian countries living in cities from 1970 to 2020. Now, this living in cities part is very important. It is not showing as the overall population in the country, it's just as a percentage that live in cities. So, in theory, you've got 2 cases. You've got people who live in cities and people who live in somewhere other than cities. That is the countryside or in small towns. Okay, let's have a look at the graph. Here we can see it is a line graph. And always take some time to look at the graph, read the question carefully, and think about it before you start writing, so that you can understand exactly what you are looking at. So the title of the graph, percentage of the population living in cities. Okay. On the x-axis, we've got percentage of total population, and that goes from 0 up to 90. And then along the bottom, we have the year. So notice that each graph has a point for every 10 years, and then they've been joined up with a line. The most recent set of data is from 2020. 2030 and 2040 are in the future, so they are predicted. And then here in the key we have Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia. At this point I would say some of these country names might be a bit difficult to spell, but they are spelled in the question. So you should not make any spelling mistakes when writing these country names because it tells you here. So then everything all together, we have got the graph and the question. If you do want to pause the video and write your own attempt at this question now, you can do so, and then you can compare it to mine later, or take a screenshot to use later on. But now we're going to look at my example answer. Now, before I write the answer, I thought I might just note down some vocabulary that I'm going to need. So I'm looking at synonyms of some of these key words. Using synonyms not only shows your command of vocabulary, but it avoids you repeating the same word over and over again. So words like percentage and cities and population, these words you might be tempted to use the same word in every sentence. So we're going to look at some other words we can use instead. So instead of percentage, you could use proportion, amount, fraction, ratio, portion, or share. Cities could also be called urban areas, built-up areas, metropolitan areas, conurbations, large towns, or municipalities. And opposite of cities would be the countryside. And to avoid using the word countryside too often, we can substitute it for rural areas, farmland, out of town, surrounding areas, or villages. Then population, we can replace with citizens, the people, inhabitants, residents, populace, community, or society. And predicted, talking about the future, could be replaced with estimated, assumed, projected, forecast, anticipated, guessed, and expected. Right, so I'm going to use a lot of this vocabulary to avoid repeating myself in my essay. Here we go. So this is my answer to this writing task 1 question. The proportion of citizens living in urban areas as opposed to the countryside for 4 different countries in Southeast Asia is shown in the line graph provided. The graph includes historical data for the years 1970 to 2020, as well as projected numbers until 2040. In 1970 and 1990, the Philippines had the highest percentage of residents living in built-up areas, with 32% and 48% in these years respectively. However, this fraction then decreased for the next 2 decades before starting to increase again. The percentage of Malaysians living in metropolitan areas has been the highest since 2000 and is anticipated to remain this way until at least 2040. The figures suggest that by 2040, over 80% of Malaysia's populace will inhabit large conurbations. Indonesia had the lowest ratio of city dwellers of the countries measured, with only 14% in 1970. However, people moved from rural areas to municipalities at a faster rate than Malaysia and Thailand, resulting in Indonesia becoming the second highest percentage by 2020, and that is expected to continue into the future. In Thailand, the majority of citizens currently live in the countryside or smaller towns and villages, and this is true throughout the study period and into the future. By 2040, if these predictions are correct, Thailand will be the only country of these 4 with more people living in rural areas than cities. Okay, that is the end of my essay, and that is 231 words. So remember, we needed at least 150, so I have written a bit more than we needed to write, just to give examples. So what I've done is I've decided to write one small paragraph about each of the countries, and therefore each of the different lines on the graph. I have used numbers from the graph where appropriate. I have used comparative and superlative words such as highest and most, this kind of thing. And I've highlighted a few words here that I wanted to mention. So we've got historical data describing things from the past. Use of the word respectively there. So when I've used two dates, 1970 and 1990, then I've used two percentages, 32 and 48, and then the word respectively. That shows that the first percentage goes with the first date, and the second percentage goes with the second date. So I'm clearly saying that 1970 had 32% and 1990 had 48% of people living in cities. We've got the word decades here. A decade is a period of 10 years. So 2 decades, 20 years. Here we have the word inhabit, which means to live in. That's a verb. Then I had dwellers, people who live somewhere, so city dwellers, people who live in cities. I've used the phrase second highest, so Indonesia becoming the second highest, Philippines was the highest, and then Indonesia. And then in the end, I've got majority, meaning most of. Notice that with task 1, you do not need to give any reasons, you do not need to give your opinion, and you don't need to write a conclusion. So I've just described what I can see in the graph, and then I've stopped. Okay, so that is my task 1 essay. Let's move on to writing task 2. So from IELTS Book 18, writing test 1, task 2 says you should spend about 40 minutes on this task, write about the following topic. Then there's a question in the box, and then give reasons for your answer and include any relevant examples from your own knowledge or experience. Write at least 250 words. These statements are the same for every writing task 2. It's only the part in the box that will change. So they're always going to be 40 minutes, examples, knowledge, experience, and 250 words. So now let's look at the question inside the box. The most important aim of science should be to improve people's lives. To what extent do you agree or disagree with this statement? Okay, so this is a very common question type for task 2. To what extent do you agree or disagree with the statement? That is the question, so we have to make sure that we are answering that question. To what extent means how much, and do you, so it's asking for your opinion, agree or disagree. So in our introduction, we're going to state what the opinion is and state if we agree or disagree with it. Okay. Again, before you start writing, maybe write down some key vocabulary that you want to include. Think about the structure. We need an introduction, body paragraphs, and a conclusion. So let's now have a look. Again, if you want to pause it now and do your own essay, you can. But now I'm going to look at my example essay for this question. So the most important aim of science should be to improve people's lives. To what extent do you agree or disagree with this statement? Introduction. Science plays a central role in the advancement of modern society, influencing nearly every aspect of human life. While science can serve many purposes, from expanding theoretical knowledge to exploring the mysteries of the universe, I strongly agree with the viewpoint that its primary aim should be to improve people's lives. First and foremost, the most tangible benefits of scientific progress are seen in healthcare. Scientific discoveries have led to life-saving vaccines, advanced surgical procedures, and improved diagnostics, which have collectively increased life expectancy and quality of life across the globe. For instance, the rapid development of COVID-19 vaccines illustrates how scientific efforts directed towards human welfare can mitigate global crises and save millions of lives. In addition, Science contributes significantly to solving practical problems such as food security, clean energy, and environmental conservation. Agricultural technologies developed through scientific research have enhanced crop yields, helping to reduce hunger in many parts of the world. Similarly, breakthroughs in renewable energy, such as solar and wind power, are enabling societies to reduce their dependence on fossil fuels, thereby mitigating climate change and improving living conditions. Opponents may argue that the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake is a valid and essential goal of science. They contend that curiosity-driven research often leads to unexpected applications that benefit humanity in the long run. For example, theoretical physics, once considered abstract, has laid the groundwork for technologies like GPS and MRI scanners. However, even these developments ultimately demonstrate how science, regardless of its original intent, proves its value by enhancing human life. In conclusion, while the pursuit of knowledge is a notable endeavour, the most compelling and justifiable aim of science is to improve the lives of people. Focusing scientific efforts on addressing human needs ensures that research remains relevant, ethical, and beneficial to society as a whole. Therefore, I strongly agree with the statement that improving human life should be the foremost goal of science. Okay, that is my essay, and that is a total of 318 words. Again, clearly over the 250 minimum, so a bit more than needed, but I don't really think you could do this essay in less than that. Right, let's have a look back at some of these things here. So, for my introduction, the question was, to what extent do you agree or disagree? So I have written here, I strongly agree. So to what extent, how much, strongly, agree or disagree, agree. And I've also made it clear what I'm agreeing with. Some of this is taken from the question. Try not to copy too much directly from the question, but there might be some keywords that you're going to use again. That's okay. I have started my essay with a general statement. I like to start Task 2 essays or Part 2 of the speaking test with a general statement about the topic, just to introduce what we're going to be talking about. Then I have written 2 body paragraphs about the advantages or benefits of science with regards to people's lives. So the first one, I've talked about healthcare. I do think that is the most significant use of science. And here I've used an example. Rapid development of COVID-19 vaccines. Not only is this a good example to use, but it's also a topical one. It's from very recent times, so it's something that affects everyone in the whole world. So that's why I've chosen that one. And then secondly, I've looked at different uses of science. This is why I've divided it into 2 paragraphs. The first body paragraph about healthcare, the second one about agriculture and renewable energy. I haven't gone into as much detail on each of those individually, but there we go. There are also some examples there, like solar and wind power, for example. Then, in my third body paragraph, I've tried to have a look at the opposite point of view. For me, I can't really see much evidence to support the opposite point of view. So even the things that I've chosen, in the end, still sort of back up the point of view that I'm trying to make. So I've tried to have a think of the other point of view, but I'm not supporting that view at all. So I'm not wavering from my original standpoint. Next, we've gone on to the conclusion. So starting with in conclusion, to show that this is definitely the conclusion. Now, something that I have done throughout this essay, well, 2 or 3 times actually, is I've used a rule of 3, which is a common writing technique in English, where we use 3 adjectives or 3 examples just to make the point and illustrate it a bit more fully. So for this example that I've highlighted, I've got relevant, ethical, and beneficial to society. That's my 3 things that I've put together. And in the final sentence, I'm restating my opinion. So strongly agree, there it is again. I've reworded it though this time for the last part. So improving human life should be the foremost goal of science. That's paraphrasing the question. I don't want to say the same thing that I said in the introduction, but I want it to have the same meaning. So it's similar, but I've changed some of the wording there. Again, this shows more vocabulary and avoids repetition. So that is my task 2 essay. So just to bring back there, task response, task achievement. Did I answer the question, and does my essay look like an essay? Yes, I hope so in both cases. Cohesion and coherence. Do the ideas flow, make sense one idea to the next, and have I used linking words? At this stage, I might go back and see if I need to add any more linking words or sequencing words. Phrases like in conclusion. Perhaps there could be room to put in a few more. Grammatical range and accuracy, or grammar. So I've tried to use a range of different grammar. The task 1 question was quite unusual in that it had future tense in a line graph. That doesn't normally happen, but there we go. And vocabulary, again, I think I've done quite well in my vocabulary. I've used quite a wide range, and I've tried not to use the same vocabulary too often. So that is the end of this video. I hope you have found it useful and it's given you some ideas and maybe some new vocabulary that you will be able to use in your writing. Thanks for watching. Good luck with your upcoming tests. Remember to like, subscribe and comment, and I will see you again for another Traveller's Guide IELTS video very soon. Thank you and goodbye for now.